To my people, once again, welcome to Africa Renaissance channel. And my people, today I want us to discuss the country of Uganda. And Uganda is a country that is located on the eastern part of the Africa continent. And the country has a very unique nickname. And the nickname of the country is the Pearl of Africa. And the reason why it has such a nickname is because the country is very beautiful, it is very green, and it has amazing landscapes. And my people, the reason why I want us to discuss Uganda is because its president, who is Yoweri Museveni. And by the way, I consider Yoweri Museveni to be the godfather of African politics. This is a man who has been in the political scenes for a very long period of time. He became the president of Uganda in 1986. And at that time, I'm very sure that most of my viewers were not even born. So you can be sure that Yoweri Museveni understands the African political landscape very well. And so you should always take the words that he states, he makes very seriously. And recently, my people, Yoweri Museveni was in Nairobi, which is the capital of Kenya. And he made a very insightful speech about how the Bretton Woods institutions, and these are institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF, sabotage the development of the African continent. And before I proceed, have a look at this video and then we can have a discussion afterwards.
If you don't fund the railway, how will you get low transport costs? Wonderful people, Banco Mundial, IMF, all this. Where will low cost operation come from if you don't have a railway? I have been here for the last 64 years. I've been watching as a student leader, as a freedom fighter, now as the leader of a country. How many railways have been constructed or funded in Africa? The few that have been was by China, the Tanzania Railway to Zambia, and recently, China, another one here in Kenya, and then Tanzania on their own, they are building a railway line. So, if you are talking of helping Africa, the railway, I don't want to be involved in any other words, no, please. The railway. Because if you fund the railway, you will have low cost of transport, and you can produce products which are cheap, which can be bought in the world. So you audit how much funding, all these billions you are talking about, how much of it has gone to the railway. Audit it. The second cost pusher is electricity. If you don't find electricity and you talk about sustainable development, what are you talking about? Private sector-led growth. Maneno tu. Electricity, we must have low-cost electricity, not exceeding 5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's what I insist on in Uganda. I'm tired of all these stories.
If you are a poor African country, you need to break the cycle of poverty. And how do you break the cycle of poverty? Well, you break the cycle of poverty by investing in capital projects. And what I mean by capital projects, these are projects such as railways and roads, electricity, manufacturing, and irrigation, But if you use your resources for recurrent expenditure, and also for capacity building, you're not going to make any meaningful progress. And according to the statements of Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni, the IMF and the World Bank are very hesitant in, loaning Africa countries money to invest in capital projects. And he gave various examples when he made attempts, to secure funding for investing in capital projects back in his country, but the IMF and the World Bank were very hesitant in loaning the country money. So these institutions are only interested in loaning money for expenditure in, recurrent and capacity building purposes. And the downside of this is that if you spend your money in recurrent expenditure, this is not an investment. Where are you going to get the money to repay the loans that you took from, the IMF and the World Bank? And basically what this does is that it traps your country for a long period of time, and you find yourself in a situation where you are unable to change your realities. So Yoweri Museveni gave an example of the attempts that he made, to secure funding from the IMF and World Bank to invest in railway projects back in his country. But these institutions have always been hesitant, and they always flat out refused. And this statement, resonates very well with me, because if you look at, the railway projects which have been, undertaken in the Africa continent, and one example of that project is the Tazara Railway, and this is a railway network between the countries of Tanzania and Zambia. And this is a project which was implemented, which was financed by the Chinese. And Kenya recently did another, railway project from the town of Mombasa to Nairobi. And this project was also financed by the Chinese. So we see that the IMF and World Bank have not invested in any railway projects in the Africa continent. They prefer spending their money on capacity building and also in recurrent expenditure of African countries. And secondly, Museveni talked about, investment in electricity, because if you want to produce goods at a cheaper price, of course you must invest in electricity generation projects. You have to construct dams in your country. But each and every time that, Africa countries approach the IMF and the World Bank for funds so that they can invest in electricity generation projects back in their countries, the IMF is very hesitant. And this is because the IMF knows very well that if African countries invest in electricity generation projects, obviously they are going to become very wealthy, and they won't need the assistance of, the IMF and the World Bank years down the line. And this is why they never invest in electricity generation projects. And he was also talking about seeking assistance for manufacturing, because to put up, manufacturing factories and companies, of course you need resources, you need money. And now that many African countries are poor, they don't have the means to raise these resources. But the IMF and the World Bank are very hesitant in providing the necessary capital, for Africans, so that they can set up manufacturing companies, back in the African continent, so that we can be able to produce goods that can compete against, any other country in the world, including China. And also, he talked about, resources to invest on irrigation projects. And, for any country to achieve development, it has to sustain itself in matters of production of food. And as most of you are aware by now, Africa is very fertile, you know, and also Africa has a very huge youthful population, you know, but we need money, we need resources so that we can invest in irrigation projects. And we see that the IMF and the World Bank are very hesitant in providing such resources so that we can invest in irrigation. In essence, and by investing in irrigation, we will be able to sustain ourselves, and we won't be reliant on the Western countries for food donations and stuff like that. And so the lesson from this speech is that Africans have to come up with their own mechanisms, you know, so that they can finance their own capital projects, because it is very clear that the IMF and the World Bank are not interested in helping Africans in a way that changes their realities, you know, and alleviates their suffering in the Africa continent. Well, my people, that's all that I have for today. If you want to watch more of this content, make sure that you subscribe to this channel. Goodbye.